Good afternoon, everyone. Join us live for our fundraiser webinar of the PropFundrs Community. My name is David Johnstone. I'm the Chief Vision Officer of PropFundrs. Delighted to be joined by one of our team, Todd Walker, who is our Marketing Manager. Hello, Todd. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Very, very busy, but very good.
Okay, the way to be, the way to be. And let me say a quick hello to our guests who will be doing our panel just in a few minutes regarding planning. So I'll go to Amanda first of all. Hi, Amanda. Thanks for joining.
Afternoon. Hello.
Good to have you. And then Nick, how are you?
Hi, David. Hi, everyone.
Fantastic. And then Mr. Jonathan Price at the bottom. How are you?
Good afternoon, everyone. Hi.
Excellent. Look at that. Sound's working perfect. Lights working perfectly. All ready to rock and roll. All's good. Normally, as we're killing time, we're talking about the weather. It just dawned on me that Nick being in Belfast, same as me, we're probably looking at the same clouds, Nick. So there's no point in asking you what the weather's like where you are.
No change there, David.
Just different types of rain on different days is pretty much the par for the course in Northern Ireland. So look, let's get straight in to this. Obviously, most people will be watching the recording of this. This is a monthly community webinar that we do. We do record it live because I think it leads to like a better interaction when it's actually live. But I know the vast majority of you will be watching a recording or watching a short that has been made of a particular point that one of the panelists have made about our key topic. So today, our topic is planning, quite a controversial one in some respects, but we'll go through the normal formalities before we get stuck into our discussion. So first of all, for anyone new to PropFundrs, our mission statement is to empower SME property developers to build more homes by disrupting the alternative funding market. So what we're attempting to do is to play our part, contribute, bring value to the market, and helping particularly SME property developers, and more often than not, the newer people to the market. I appreciate some people fit into the SME property developer category, but they're very, very experienced. We tend to engage a lot with maybe the newer developers, particularly around the area of funding, as well as compliance that obviously relates to funding. So that's what we're about. That's what our mission is. That's what we're motivated to do, is to help SME developers access the funding they need to get the projects funded. And of course, around that is a whole array of factors and issues that we deal with as we go along our property journey. Now, we always tend to start with a little bit just about the market, what's actually happening. So we no better place for a couple of minutes to talk about the budget that has just happened. So I'll let the panelists contribute as to what their take is on the budget. So any of the panelists want to jump in first, or in terms of any analysis that you've done on the recent budget? See them all diving in straight away. Amanda, you're not on mute, so you can go first with your take.
Oh, the first to take myself off. I think that's probably indicative of how relatively bland it probably was. I mean, certainly from a planning point of view, there were no massive nuggets in there. I did have it on actually in the background. I was working away when the budget was on last week. The only one that kind of really I took a bit of notice on was on the furnished holiday lets, because obviously it was taking away the tax advantage for people who've got short-term furnished holiday lets and aligning them with more traditional residential side of things. But that in itself, not necessarily so much a planning thing, but it kind of loops in with there was consultation last year about creating the new use class for holiday lets and the registration system for it, which at the minute is due to take effect towards the summer. But that will kind of probably be dependent upon where we're at from an election point of view, I would think, because we still don't know when an election is going to happen yet. So that was the only real thing that propped my attention really about it.
Yeah, very good. And in terms of capital gains tax, I don't know, Jonathan, if that's any impact on you or some of the projects, but obviously they're going to cut capital gain tax by this sort of 4%. Is that going to make any big difference, do you think, or pretty much business as usual?
No, I think we often use an SPV when we're doing a development and then disposing at the back end, which allows us to then get an entrepreneurial relief. So truth be told, haven't had a moment spare to even sit and analyse any impacts here. But no, I don't. We don't sell everything that we build out as well. So capital gains won't necessarily apply. But the furnished holiday lets is a bit more of a concern for us because we have a portfolio of those. But again, truth be told, I haven't had a chance to sit with the fellow guys and analyse what that might do for us or do against us. So we'll have to see.
Okay. I know there's sort of capital allowances that may impact some people. An extension to the full expensing on sort of leased assets may affect some people. Stamp duty, actually interesting, Nick, it involves England and Northern Ireland for the stamp duty changes. So really around the multiple dwelling relief. But I'm sure that doesn't affect you sort of in your planning role with Turley.
Not really. No, it doesn't. To be honest, as Amanda said, nothing big planning wise that we can see coming out of this.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's a blog actually up on the back office. So if you're a member of our community and you go to your back office on the PropFundrs.com website and log in, there's actually a blog there which covers all the key aspects of the budget and a few sort of comments around that. So by all means, have a look at that. Okay, so just before we get into our panel discussion, again, for the sort of new people tuning in and listening to our webinar, really what PropFundrs is about, as I've said, is about helping property developers access debt and equity. So we can help with the DD file preparation. We can try and put you in touch with the right fundraising partner, be that debt or equity, and really help you prepare your capital stack. We can hold your hand through the fundraising process, but really it's all about education, helping you prepare for funding, and then introducing you to funding partners. So if anyone's listening to the webinar and that is of interest to you, then obviously reach out to us and we'll be happy to engage. It's very much about helping developers save time and money. And if you can save time and save money, well, then you're definitely going the right direction, I think. So let's get into our panel discussion. I'm really looking forward to this today because planning is certainly one of those topics that can divide people, and people have got some strong opinions on it. So let me first of all let each of the panelists maybe take 2 minutes to introduce themselves and the background. We'll go just in order on the screen there. So Jonathan, Nick, then Amanda. So just take a minute and a half, 2 minutes background, and then obviously specific to your interest in planning, please.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Jonathan Price, co-founded a company called Rumford, Bridgens Price, and we're trading as RBP Property Holdings Limited. We started our career prior to Rumford, Bridgens Price forming in buy-to-let investments, small minor refurbishments and acquisitions of and development of HMO and well, that kind of shared multiple occupation housing, and we moved into larger scale developments probably 2012, around that kind of time, where we moved into a 5-unit conversion on, it was a commercial building, large town centre building in the middle of a town in Cambridgeshire. And yeah, we did very well actually, because we hit the market quite right at that time, and it was something we were passionate about carrying on with. So ever since then, we've been using the planning system to help us get through sometimes complicated planning matters of larger developments and sometimes smaller. Nearly always we're working on something to do with an older grade 2 listed building, because we like the history involved and are more keen on that than perhaps some of the new build, but we do new build as well. But yeah, that's really our history, and right up to present day we're dealing with multiple apps in the planning system each and every year. So that's what we're doing.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jonathan. Nick, you go next, please.
Yep, thanks, David. So, a bit of background on myself. I actually started my career in politics. That's what I did my undergraduate in. And then when I was doing that, I saw potential to switch careers effectively and had a real interest in the built environment. So I started in planning. My first job was actually in the Isle of Man. So I have a couple of years experience working in the Isle of Man, which is uh, interesting to say the least. And then moved over working with a company called Capita, who effectively outsource some planning services to councils across England and Wales. And then from there, I've been in Turley the last 2 years. I do work for clients across particularly England and Northern Ireland, more so Northern Ireland, and also some down in the Republic of Ireland as well. So a real varied mix of clients, and we advise on appraisals for site selection through to the full planning process, getting your application pulled together and submitted, and advising on risk and things as well. So interesting and varied.
Sounds good. And then Amanda.
Yeah, sorry. Hi again, David. I currently am the managing director of Summit Planning Associates, which is my own little planning consultancy. I've, oh God, more years than I care to remember now in planning, getting on for about 22, I think I'm coming up for. So I started out in local government. I did an undergraduate in planning, so not quite as exciting as Nick's. I did an undergraduate in planning plus postgraduate. Started out in local government, in a bit of strategic planning first, and then moved into development control, and then from there went to work client side for a developer, for a house builder, and then moved into consultancy from there. So I've worked across the three main sort of sectors in between the public and the private sector in consultancy, and these days tend to work across the board. A lot of it tends to be residential, commercial, but have worked on some renewable energy projects as well. Did quite a bit of waste planning at one point, and I still dip in and out of that. And lastly, before I left local government, I was an enforcement officer, so I do still pick up quite a bit of enforcement work as well. So quite a varied workload, which keeps it interesting. That's what keeps it interesting for me, keeping it varied.
Excellent. Okay, right. So let's just come off screen, I think, so it's easier to see everybody on that front. Excellent. Yeah, if any questions come into the Q&A, then Todd, you can keep an eye on that. If any come in, and we can, or if you can think of any questions yourself. Sometimes people will text in and WhatsApp questions. So if you have any planning questions, Todd, you can be sort of writing them down, and then we can put them to the panelists. So let's kick off. Give me a summary of what each of you think the current state of planning in the UK is. So if it's a couple of sentences, how would you describe? You've just been beamed in from outer space, and someone says, "What is the state of planning in the UK?" So we'll go in reverse then, from Amanda to Nick to Jonathan this time. So straight in with Amanda.
Oh, thanks. No pressure. Can probably sum up in one word at the moment. I think shocking is probably the best word. And I don't see it getting much better. I'm not sure it can get much worse. I don't see it getting much better imminently, particularly when there's been an election year as well. It's the same struggles that it's been having for most of my career since being in local government. And at the heart of it, the bottom line problem is the planning departments just aren't resourced well enough. I know we keep talking about needing to reform the system itself, which does need reforming as well, but the planning departments at the end of the day aren't resourced to then implement or even a reform system. It's not going to get any better. It's as simple as that. It doesn't get any more exciting, unfortunately.
Would you say, though, Amanda, that the efficiency of those same planning departments is worse now than it was pre-COVID? That would be a perception. I don't want to steal maybe Jonathan's thunder, but for developers out there, it's like there's always been challenges, but like, why the crisis now that COVID's over in the distant past, and yet the efficiency just seems to be, as you said, shocking at the minute. So what's changed?
It certainly hasn't got any better. Yeah, I would say it's probably got noticeably worse since we've come out of COVID. Whether or not that's a combination of people still with a home working, hybrid working environment, I think is part of it. I think some people have not adapted as well to that as others have, and that's brought with it, mental health issues and issues that people struggle with, which then puts just the added pressure onto planning departments. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there's a couple that I do deal with. They have a more rota type system. So they seem, some of the bigger authorities where there's more people probably still anyway, have a better balance of still being able to have that better balance between people in and out of the office. But yeah, it certainly hasn't got any better since COVID. If anything, it's got slightly worse. What other impacts that people may have had as a result of COVID, which has then had an impact on people going back into work. I don't know exactly what the issue is, but certainly it's got worse. So it's just having that added impact on timescales. Not so much traditional planning issues. The planning issues are still the same. Trying to just get through the system is the worsening challenge, I think.
Okay. Brilliant. And we'll definitely unpack some of that as we go forward. So Nick, sort of a summary of how you would explain the current planning process in the UK.
Yeah, I would agree with what Amanda's said there. I'd say we're very much in a state of flux at the moment. There's a lot of uncertainty, and there's, planning has probably become more of a headline issue this last 12 months than it's been for a long time. That has benefits in terms of hopefully getting some political impetus to make improvements to the system, or so-called improvements to the system, but also planning has become probably more confrontational than it's ever been. And working in planning, and Amanda will have experienced this working across local government as well as in consultancy. It's easy, I suppose, to look at planning officers and local authorities and say, well, certainly there's issues there with resourcing, but there are significant pressures on that side too, politically and for members of the public. And there is a degree of sympathy there as well with what those guys go through. But yeah, look, there's a lot of uncertainty in the system, and I think certainly from an English perspective, there's so many changes floating about. Certainly with the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, which we may focus on, and different things. And there's a lot of uncertainty with what exactly the planning system is going to look like in 12 months, 2 years. In Northern Ireland, it all boils down to resourcing here at the moment. For example, our Planning Appeals Commission, who are responsible for progressing local development plans, are extremely under-resourced at the moment, which is effectively holding up everything from zoning of new land for development right through to decisions being made. So the resourcing thing is the fundamental issue at the moment, I think.
No, I think we'll definitely come back to the resourcing. And I love the fact you mentioned sort of the big word uncertainty there. And that's probably a good word when it comes to when I'm talking to developers. That seems to be something that's frustrating for everybody, but at the same time, it's just a reality. Like, who knows what the next 6 months, 9 months, 12 months is going to hold. And once you've got uncertainty in any sphere of life, particularly around planning, then it just makes it more difficult to operate in that space. So Jonathan, you're coming at this from a developer. So again, a summary from you. You've obviously had some successes. Have you, if you want to sort of evolve then into any maybe challenges that you've had. So yeah, summary first, and then any challenges you can talk about.
Summary. I quite liked Amanda's first words. Shocking is fair. It is shocking. I wouldn't say it's shocking everywhere. It's shocking where I am. But there are other councils that I work in, other local authorities, where you can put an application in and it does come out in a reasonable time frame. And that is really, that's really the epitome of the issue for a developer, because where I'm sat right now in Huntingdonshire, having an application have no real possible known end date, and timescales really just sliding, and they have been for years, you are having significant issues trying to forecast everything, from negotiating the upfront contracts with the landowners or the building owners, vendors, right through to trying to hold your financing in place, right through into Not so much the exiting, because that isn't really subject once you've got through the planning process. The exiting is more market driven, more market related. But yeah, I mean, it is bad, and I don't know how it ever changes. You were talking about what it was used to be like a long time ago. It's never been great since I've been doing it. I'm not sure COVID had as much of an impact as time itself. COVID seems to have like slowed things down a little bit further, but it has always been quite slow in this particular area. I was in a gym once, probably a few years ago now, and I bumped into some guy in the changing room. And I don't know how we got onto the subject, but I was moaning about how bad it was in this area. And he said, "Oh, that's a shame. When I was head of council or working in a council, everything went in and came out in 2 months." Which I find hard to believe, but I didn't have a good reason to tell him he wasn't being truthful with me. So things must have been better at one point, and I don't know what the reasons are. The other areas I was mentioning that I worked in, where things go in and come out faster, are particularly affluent areas. This, where I'm at now, is perhaps not. So you could, and you might argue that it is funding and resource, and I'm sure that is the case in many things, but throwing money at stuff is not always the answer. I know a town planner who came out of our local planning authority here. She's gone into the private sector now. And I got off record, probably shouldn't be putting this on record, but she essentially said it was bad management. And I don't know how much of that is true as well. So yeah, it's a tough one for me to really tell you how things get fixed, because I don't honestly know. But yeah, we can talk further on that as we go through.
Yeah. Hold that thought on how we fix things, because I definitely want to come back around the houses on that one in a few minutes. But just to unpack something there, because I think raised a very interesting point there, Jonathan, where you talked about, well, it's not shocking everywhere. So that then, I think, takes you down a thought process of, well, does that mean then if resources is one of the big factors, and I don't think anyone's denying it's a factor, but if resources is the main factor, does it mean that some council areas have got all the resources they need to deliver a good job and others don't? Or if resources are stretched everywhere, why is it okay some places and not okay others? Which I then think brings back to the other point you made, which I think is probably more relevant, and that is it's the individuals involved in those councils potentially. I know that's a hard conversation to have, but the harsh reality is that if you're a developer, this is your livelihood, this is your business. And if you're an investor in property, you're putting hard-earned money into property deals that are then struggling because, I'll call a spade, because of sometimes incompetence at council level, and the mindset of, oh, well, kick that down the road 3 months or 6 months, I don't really care about it. I'm not even bother answering that letter from the developer because I don't have to. I'm under no pressure to. And it's actually messing with people's livelihoods and their investments. So I'll leave that open for comment from any of you on that. But is it incompetency in some places, or is it all resources?
Well, I'll just carry on because I guess I was already yapping. There's definitely incompetency. I can give you multiple examples of incompetency, but also, you're dealing with something that's plan led and not commercially led, and so you've already got a mismatch straight away of how to approach things in life. You just laid it on about, David, about this is my livelihood, and I've had to explain that to case officers before. And they say, well, I don't want to burden you with my problems. I know this, I know they've got a lot of work on. But yeah, we had an underpassing block of flats built once, and we had some bins put at the back under where the car parking was, under the building, essentially where it was elevated up, and the planners could not get their heads around how the binmen were going to retrieve the bins, because they couldn't just look at their drawings properly enough to see that actually there was access and they could be dragged through, and it was just that sort of thing is just you know, it happens more often than it definitely should do. But yeah, so it does make a mockery of the system when you've got to provide all the drawings, spend all the money, take all those risks, and then somebody isn't able to read the drawings correctly and just make simple decisions about bin collection, for instance. But
yeah, well, that's definitely incompetency. So I'll just remind everyone we don't sort of bring attendees up onto be a panelist, but if you have a question, then stick it in the Q&A, and Todd will be covering the questions in a few minutes. So I see there was a couple of raised hands there, but we don't bring people up. If you just leave your questions there, and we'll definitely deal with them. So were you going to come in there, Nick, on the back of that at all, or?
Yeah, look, those are fair points. And John, you've touched on the different mindset, that commercial aspect versus the plan led thing, and I suppose that is a natural aspect. And I suppose planning is there for a reason, and I wouldn't be a planner if I didn't defend the purpose of town planning and I suppose preserving our places and preserving our environment whilst also delivering growth. But the key aspect of that is it must be something which can deliver growth and can deliver investment. It shouldn't be a barrier to that. How we get it to that point, will vary across the country and between jurisdictions as well. It is a difficult one, and there is always going to be an element of risk in planning. You're never going to take that out of it. Amanda and I would say just hire one of us to help you through the planning system, and that might be risk it as much as
An unashamed plug.
as much as possible. But like it's a qualitative thing, planning, and when you put that up against hard numbers and commercial interest, there's always going to be a bit of a mix match there. So look, I think it's all about minimizing risk, but you're never gonna have perfect alignment between a planner and a developer for most parts.
Brilliant. Okay, I'll go to Amanda on this, and then Todd will go to you for any questions in the Q&A, whatever. So Amanda, incompetency or lack of resources?
Well, it's a combination of both. I mean, is it incompetency or certainly lack of quality and not enough quality? When you're talking about stretched and under-resourced departments, it's then the lack of or enough depth in the quality as well. Most of the organisations outside the local government wouldn't function with that level of quality in it. And the local government is one of the few institutions that you can have a lower level of quality without the accountability. It's the lack of accountability as well, and that's what doesn't marry up with the mentality of the private sector at all. I mean, the planning system in itself, I still think there's nothing wrong with the principle of a plan-led system, but that assumes that you've got quality, up-to-date plans for a better resource planning department to be working with in the first place. So that's the broken element. You've got not enough competency, not enough quality, plans that aren't up to date, that they're still trying to work within a framework that's God knows how many years out of date. And then that's when you get the bigger disconnect with the commercial reality of developers who are trying to deal with sites in the real world today.
Okay. Yep. Very good. Very good. Some really good points there. I think to take away and chew over on that front. So Todd, any questions in the Q&A or other questions have come into you in advance?
Yeah, so Keith has asked about flood risk. Very high risk of flooding on an auction property I'm looking at. As it backs onto a river with 3% risk. Very high surface water risk of 3%. My question as part of PD or building control application, will they, in your opinion, place any restrictions or flood mitigation to any rear or extensions if I wish to build it out?
Perhaps probably one more for, well, I am Amanda or Nick. All three of you can comment on that. I don't know whether Jonathan may have come across sort of flood risk in his. So Amanda, let you go first.
Ultimately, is the question asking or stating which flood zone? Is there a flood zone that
he's basically asking if will there be restrictions if they want to basically extend the property on those new bits, because there's obviously a risk of surface water or flooding. Are they going to have to put in basically like prevention methods to obviously stop those new bits from flooding?
Yeah, I mean the big thing to be aware of from that point of view, and the requirements, and it's something that Nick, you've probably experienced the same. The sustainable drainage side of things is massive on the agenda of local authorities at the moment. In particular, well, not so much the Environment Agency, but the lead local flood authority. So, yeah, if there's a high risk of surface water, of flooding from surface water, definitely, I would expect at the very least the need for a detailed sustainable drainage strategy, and that goes down as small as individual, proposals for individual dwellings, extensions, that kind of thing. It's it's not just reserved for your bigger schemes.
So would that say be coming in the case of like a French drain at the end of the garden to stop water coming into the property boundary, or?
It would depend, because it's quite I think it's a disproportionate process. It gets swallowed up a bit easier with bigger developments because you kind of expect it to a certain extent, but it's a disproportionate impact on smaller scale developments in terms of what the level of detail is expected to be looked at, and the basically going through making sure you've done a thorough assessment of what all the options, the sustainable options are, and what could be achieved. The more you go down the scale to the smaller scale proposals, it's a completely disproportionate level of information and detail that is required compared to
if you're doing
a
like
bigger development.
20 flats or something, and you're doing all this stuff, you're adding so much more, say roof space, which is then you got to find a place to put that water. Whereas if you're just doing a little, PD application for a small extension, it might, you're not going to need the same prevention methods, right? So yeah, hopefully that answers your question, Keith. If you have any follow-up ones, obviously chuck them in. I did have one for myself. Going to take a little selfish route here. So I've just had a deal accepted literally yesterday, and I'm going to be putting planning application for 2 HMOs next to each other in an Article 4 zone. Now, as a new developer, what challenges do new developers face when submitting those applications? Like, is there like key pitfalls that I should be looking out for that's going to make it easier for the application to go through? Now, I've done a bit of research on HMOs that have been approved like just down the road. Obviously, there's a density issue and stuff that you should look at. So obviously, you should make sure that it will qualify. I know it's going to qualify because it's below the threshold, but are there like key things with drawings or things that we should be looking at to add that might just be like, oh, okay, these are different things that they're likely to accept?
I can jump in there, Todd. Yeah, look, you seem to have your head fairly screwed on when it comes to what you need to do, to be fair. Just checking if there's any limits in your area for the amount of HMOs in that area. In terms of drawings and stuff, it's generally just detailed floor plans, existing and proposed, and then if it's a listed building, obviously you've that whole process to go through as well. But the process isn't necessarily any more onerous than a normal change of use application. It's just making sure that, in principle, an additional couple of HMOs in that area is going to be acceptable to the council.
Cool. And then I guess a follow-up to that is there like one thing, or is there specific like set of things that developers can do that's going to make the planner's life a bit easier so they can better understand it? Or is it just that, like Jonathan mentioned, there is a incompetency issue, no matter how much you try, they won't understand? Or is it like
most local authorities have a validation checklist, and if they were in this room right now, they'd be harping on at you just to make you tick all those bits off.
The tick.
I used to work as a planning officer, and that was one of the biggest reasons for delays, in fairness, was people not putting the right amount of information in, or their architect not putting the right amount of information in, or the right type of information in. So ticking those boxes, taking your time to prepare your application is one of the biggest time savers when you're putting a planning application in.
Yeah, so don't rush it, and make sure you have gone through, because they obviously will have a set criteria of things that you need to have submitted. So they're not like saying, hey, where's this? And then you're like, crap, we got to redraw this and send it over because we haven't done it, or or something, or we haven't done a detailed drawing of this section or whatever. Okay, cool. I mean, those were both the questions that I had. I hope that they might help someone. And Andrew has said the detail is required simply to deter applicants. Yeah, so obviously the more detail you provide, it's gonna, you're less likely to get some sketches of someone just drawing a box and a roof and being like, can I build this here? Cool.
Yes, I think the point Andrew's making is that the level of detail will stop anyone who's not really prepared and who really can't provide the detail. But, you know, from actually then talking up the process by submitting insufficient or incomplete applications, which is fair enough. Jonathan, anything you want to come in on that in terms of, I mean, obviously you've indicated that you're experiencing problems, frustrations, but it obviously hasn't prevented you and your partners from carrying on, if you like, this strategy. I mean, for some people, they probably just go, you know what, I'm not even going to get involved in any project that involves planning because of all the things we've talked about, but it hasn't sufficiently. I'm laughing to myself here. It's the old story of the dog sleeping on a nail on the front veranda. Every so often he yelps because of the pain of the nail, but it doesn't hurt him enough that he actually gets up and moves somewhere else to sleep. So is the pain bearable and you still make money in the deal? Clearly.
Yes, we've made money in the deals, and it would be unfair to say that planning alone has caused all the issues that most developments endure. The one I'm stood in right now is an office on a high street that we converted. It's a grade 2 listed building. We lost our financing during this period of waiting for the planning permission to come through. It's just 3 2-beds in the centre of town. It's not unlike things we've done before, but the timescale has slipped. And so that is what has become unmanageable. And what we lost in that is our financier, which we'd already paid money into, arrange certain things, but they had to come away from it in the end, and it took, I think, 13 months in the end, this one. But granted, it is listed, so these things are a bit more complicated. But we've definitely discussed moving out of the area. We do have other interests in other areas, so we might, or we sort of spend time in those areas if it's what's suiting the strategy. At the moment, I'm looking at one in Kent, actually. Only because it's where I grew up, and I was passed a lead by somebody that I grew up with, and and down in that particular council, it's faster, and that what interests me with that is it means my options, my negotiating options are greater when I'm dealing with the vendor. The vendor's very old in this case and wants to move on to assisted living, and you know, if I was in this area, I'd have to say to him, look, I can't really do that. I've got to tie this up in such a way that I don't lose here. You know, I'm not trying to make you lose, but at the same time, because I can't tell you when it's coming in, it's impossible to give you what I would call an almost normal transaction, you know, so that's quite tricky. So to answer your question, I'm not looking to move at the moment, because not physically, but, you know, in terms of where we build, yes, possibly. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. So if I could bring in one aspect here, because I think it's important perhaps for fundraisers, developers, perhaps just to understand the context of planning. And maybe Amanda, go with you first, and then Nick can come in behind you. So, I mean, what the current planning system, obviously you've got your Planning Act 2008. I know there was a white paper, was it last year the white paper was? So what is sort of the legal basis, or what is like the current planning system based on? Maybe just speak to that.
Well, I mean, fundamentally, it's still a plan-led system. We had last year, back into the year before, there was obviously talk in one of the other, been that many consultation papers out. I lose track of them all, to be honest. And this year, particularly being in an election year, I don't listen to half of what's coming out of the national level at the moment, because the reality of a lot of it happening, there's a lot of, you know, policy mongering at the moment, getting manifestos ready. Some of it will carry through because it's got cross-party support anyway. But basically, until we've had a general election and we know exactly where we're at, there's very little I would expect much more of any significance to happen between now and a general election. But ultimately, or fundamentally rather, the planning system is still a plan-led system. That's not changed, and is looking unlikely to change significantly at the moment.
Okay.
And without a change in the framework, the issues that we're facing are not going to fundamentally change.
Yeah. Okay. Any observations on that, Nick, just in terms of the legal legislation on the whole thing?
Yeah, Amanda's correct. I mean, there's been a lot of talk recently with the levelling up and Regeneration Act and what might fall out of that in terms of planning regulation. There will be bits and pieces, but a lot of it is effectively window dressing. There's nothing that's going to fundamentally change how the planning process works for your day-to-day applicant, and your developer largely will be the same. It might be slightly more onerous in terms of providing things like biodiversity net gain on certain developments and things, but generally speaking, I mean, the existing problems are going to stay problems. There's talk of a big, kind of Michael Gove has spoke about a big investment into planning resource, as we've been talking about, over the next while. But again, unless that's managed correctly, you know, when you spread that over 200 plus or whatever it is, local authorities in England, that's watered down quite significantly, and it's difficult to see how that'll have a real meaningful impact. In Northern Ireland, it's obviously a wee bit different. Things changed quite recently, actually, in 2015. Planning powers were devolved to local councils, where previously they were all centralised. So that has had significant teething problems over the last few years, and we're still seeing the outworkings of that 8 years on. More than half of the local authorities here in Northern Ireland don't have their own local development plan and are still relying on very outdated plans, sometimes dating from the 90s. So that's the issue here. Things are moving quite slowly. And I say, if you were to ask developers across various UK jurisdictions, the main things they're struggling with are probably very similar.
Okay, just speak to that, Nick, regarding the different jurisdictions. So obviously you're Northern Ireland here. The big thing we don't have obviously is PD, permitted development. If you want to even just speak to that, how it works in Northern Ireland compared to elsewhere.
Yeah, we do have PD. It's just less. It's less encapsulating. England has a lot more of a complex PD system, where you've got the system of prior approvals and things for certain types of development. Another helpful one would be, and some of your people on this call might have used it, would be Class MA in England. We're able to convert an office into residential use. We don't have anything similar to that in Northern Ireland, and the PD is largely focused on sort of more classic types of permitted development, like extensions and various things. So if you were to ask most people over here, I would say that the takeaway would be the system in Northern Ireland certainly tends to follow the English system, but a number of years behind. So it does catch up eventually, and it largely mirrors it, but it's always fallen quite a bit behind. I'd say as much as 10 years in certain parts. Things like developer obligations, even, where you're required to provide affordable housing for a certain percentage of your development, you know, that's only quite recently starting to come into Northern Ireland, even though it's been a feature in England for a good number of years. So there are quite a few differences. Fundamentally, still a plan-led system. You know, the bare bones of it are the same, but there's probably less features available to developers over here in terms of getting around a full planning application than there is in England.
Okay, brilliant. Does Amanda or Jonathan want to comment on that, to different jurisdictions, or not, as the case may be?
In terms of improvements possibly coming, is that what you mean?
Or even John, just highlight what are the differences, say, between England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland. You know, if those are things that people should be aware of, or where are they different?
You know, I can say for the areas that I've operated in, and I think one of the best things I've seen, although we've not benefited from it yet, because we haven't done anything in that area for a while, is in Bath Council have an interesting fast track system, and my understanding of it is that you pay to fast track it, which is pretty ugly on the top of the bottom of things, because you know it's gonna upset people that can't pay to fast track these things, but they're actually a very fast council anyway, and it boggles my mind why a council that presumably is quite efficient already has introduced even more efficiency, and you know, probably it's for larger construction sites, but in other councils where things are more traditional and much slower, why they wouldn't just introduce that? Because if we're complaining about here lack of resource and funding, then surely having money to fast track things would solve a number of problems. But yeah, that's really all I can comment on. I really haven't done anything in Northern Ireland or Scotland, to be honest.
Okay, no, that's absolutely fine. I think Todd, another question come in there, is there?
Yeah, there's a
We go
question
to
from
Amanda then
Adam.
first.
So Adam has asked, what do you think about planning performance agreements? Will they / do they work?
Was that specifically to me?
Yeah, go ahead. You can go first.
So that's one of those things. So I've just recently, in theory, dealt with an authority that we had a planning performance agreement in place. And I wouldn't say that we benefited from any greater a service as a result of it or any greater certainty. We paid for it. We paid more for it. The local authority were able to charge a percentage uplift on the basis that it was a planning performance agreement, but it didn't give any greater certainty in the timescales or in the process itself. And that was for quite a large scale development as well, a major size development.
Maybe just for some maybe people new to planning or newer to planning listening in, just explain what is that planning agreement?
I'm not sure even most local authorities necessarily. It's kind of a premium level pre-application process, I suppose, is the best way to try and describe it. Obviously, not all authorities are offering a pre-application process anyway at the moment because they haven't got the resources to do that. Some of those that do, you get a pre-application where you effectively put some information in about a proposal. There'll be a fixed fee for it that might be just based on a written response or a meeting and a written response. A planning performance agreement is meant to be kind of the next level above that, really. So you pay a bit of an extra premium for it, but it won't guarantee you necessarily the outcome. And this, nothing can do that. But it will supposedly will give you greater certainty over fixing timescales and almost like a pre-agreed agenda of what the issues are going to be and the consultations that will take place. In theory, that's how it's supposed to work. But again, you're still talking about authorities that are strapped for resources. So they're still operating within the same strapped resource framework, trying to provide a more premium service, but they haven't got the resources to provide that premium service.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's I know it sounds a bit cynical, but for me, it's just a way for local authorities to get a bit more cash in. Is ultimately what it ends up being. You don't get the service for it. Well, you might do in some of the London authorities. It may be tighter in the London authorities because it's controlled more out of the mayor's office as well. But certainly outside of London, my experience, no, they tend to not.
Okay, no, very good. Hope that helps the questioner. Don't see any new ones in there, Todd. Any others that you have? That's the ones that we'll have so far, I think. We're going to move to wrap up here in sort of 4 or 5 minutes. I sort of promised. I know you're all three very busy people and busy schedules, so I promised it would be under the hour. So I'm gonna make sure I keep to that. I suppose where I would like to maybe get to is, are there things that if you had a magic wand or you were the government minister responsible for this, what practically can be done for improvements? I know it's easy to say, oh, we'll give them, as much resources as possible. Is there anything practically changes that you would like to see made in the planning process that you think would have a positive impact? So if we'll go Nick, Jonathan, and then back to Amanda on that.
Yeah, David, something I would like to see is, I suppose, this may depend on the crowd a bit, but commercial sort of awareness training for planners, and I suppose there's always going to be an element where people need to be patient with people coming from a different perspective, but that would certainly be helpful. You've got a lot of people that have only ever worked as a planner in a local authority and maybe aren't as in tune with the needs and the sort of challenges faced by developers and financial or otherwise, and certainly that need for certainty in the system. You're never going to get that. What we can do is work towards more strictly towards timelines. Certainly in Northern Ireland here, we don't even have the benefit of that 38-week mandatory time frame. And I appreciate that's often missed in England, but we don't even have that necessarily. There's no comeback on that. That's something I would like to see introduced here. There's a lot of efficiencies in terms of how local plan process works in Northern Ireland that could be improved at a fundamental level. And it was mentioned earlier about throwing money at the situation doesn't necessarily solve that many problems. Up to a point, I agree with you. I think the biggest benefit to planning timescales would actually be in funding consultees. Certainly we've experienced with environmental health departments and other departments which are themselves under-resourced or certainly in no mad panic to get responses out the door, which through no fault of the planning officer necessarily ends up holding up the whole process. So there's everything that feeds into planning. Planning's become so complex nowadays that there's so many different people. You could have a large application with 25 consultees feeding into that, unless they themselves are resourced. What it takes one of them to hold your whole project up. So funding across the board, not just for planning.
Okay, sounds good. Good takeaways there, Jonathan.
Where do you start? You said commercial training. I would say, yeah, that's good. I think also consistency training. I'm not sure how you do that, but I have two case officers, and one will communicate, one won't. That's to me crazy. I'm pretty sure that the idea is to be proactive and discussing things with developers rather than just sort of almost being against development, which is the case in some things. Or perhaps the confidence is low. I'm not really sure, but some tend to want to communicate, and some just find it extremely difficult to speak to. That would be helpful. As what I said earlier as well, perhaps this fast track system could work, although maybe Amanda there has put the kibosh on that, and maybe it is a revenue producer. But surely after a while, the revenue's got to be seen to be being used correctly. Perhaps in the early days, it's finding your feet, and they're just going to maybe not use the money as well as they could do. But presumably after a while, it gets better. Also, I think it's probably going to cause more complexity, unfairness, slowness, and all the rest of it. But if you consider that it takes, let's say, 12 months in my area to get permissions for 3 dwellings, and it's a similar timescale for 50, something's broken in the system, isn't it? Because I appreciate the tick boxes there, but surely there's a way of making the smaller guys get through things a bit quicker than maybe the ones that are a bit more complicated. I'm not trying to put the pain into the bigger guys, but presumably they're coming from a much more complicated site in the first place. So I don't know. I mean, there's a few ideas there.
Brilliant. Okay. Last word then to Amanda. What could you do to make changes tangibly in the short term?
There's always going to be changes to the statutory framework that will come about, but fundamentally, it's pretty much the same as Nick and Jonathan have been saying. I mean, with the timescales that are applied to application determination timescales at the moment, that they need to go and need to be realistically reviewed. The 8-week, 13-week, 16-week timescales, the 8-week and 13-week particularly. I mean, they hark back to a day when I started in local government, when the then Labour government introduced the planning delivery grant. That's where they came from. Planning delivery grant didn't hang around for very long, because possibly in the time frame, Jonathan, when you might have remembered things being a bit quicker, decisions were being made quicker. It weren't necessarily the right decisions, because you had authorities churning out refusals to meet those deadlines to qualify for the planning delivery grant. The local authority I worked for at the time was awarded quite a significant planning delivery grant at the time for good performance, for meeting the performance targets. That doesn't necessarily equate to good performance from a quality of a planning decision-making point of view. Planning delivery grant went, but they kept the timeframes in place, and that's why they've stayed ever since as a performance management measure. But they need to be reviewed because they're just not realistic. That puts what few staff are left under even more pressure, which doesn't aid certainly the communication side of things. The communication is just non-existent. Trying to get hold of a planning officer, even getting them to respond to emails, is just ridiculous. So if we review the timescales, it will ease up that expectation on decision-making timescales, which we don't get decisions in those timescales anyway. They're not worth the paper they're written on anymore. So more realistic determination timescales would ease up the pressure, which might open up the channels of communication, which means the process would potentially flow a bit better. And for me, I know planning application fees certainly in England went up just before Christmas. I don't think there'd be necessarily any issue in them potentially going up a little bit again if there was then that greater certainty over the decision making within the timescale. And the other big thing for me, for that money to be properly invested back into the planning resources, it needs to be ring fenced. And I think there needs to be legislation to ring fence the planning application fees to make sure that they are invested back into the planning department. because they just get subsumed into the council central budgets. And as we know at the moment, the majority of local authorities are on the verge of going bankrupt. So even the money that planning departments are one of the few revenue generating departments in a local authority. Parking, planning, council tax, obviously they're the big ones.
Yeah.
Every other department is taking the money out, but the money that goes into a planning department is not ring fenced to be contained within the planning department. It just goes into the central budget.
Very, very, very interesting point there regarding the revenue generating. Okay, well, look, I'm sure we could very easily stay on here for another couple of hours and dissecting all of this, but can I really thank Jonathan, Nick, and Amanda for taking time out of your busy schedules to jump on this webinar. Some really interesting points. It's interesting, obviously, each of you come from your own perspectives, your own experiences, and your own sort of roles and jobs now. And I think for anyone just listening to that, piecing that all together, hearing about the challenges, the difficulties, the frustrations, the hurdles, and then hearing some things that may make a difference. Let's hope that those that actually make decisions actually get a hold of this webinar and can actually take some of the things that have been said and then introduce that into the mix when it comes to decision making. So again, thank each one of you for that. So just to wrap up the last sort of 30 seconds, for those that aren't aware of the Property Funding Podcast, we've talked about it for a number of months. It's actually launched, Todd, now. It is live. The first one was with Tyler Newman. And Todd, I think we enjoyed filming that one. Tyler's certainly a very colourful, interesting young property developer, new generation. Any comments you want to make on that episode?
It was a great episode, and I recommend if people want to watch it to, because obviously he talks about the new parts of becoming this modern day property developer, which is, utilizing all new types of technology, social media for raising funds and things like that. So it's a very good listen.
Yeah, so if you go on to onto YouTube or Spotify to the Property Funding Podcast, you'll be able to get that episode along with a number of shorts.
Plop a link in the chat as well. So if
yes,
that's
good if you do that. That'd be brilliant if you could do that. And the next episode, which was Phoebe Porter, Phoebe Isabella Porter, thanks for full name. Young female property developer is what she calls herself. Sort of started at 17 and at age 21, she's quite a successful property developer. Fantastic story, brilliant insights into someone of that generation and how they found themselves being a developer. So that'll be the next episode that will be launched. I think, is it this week, Todd, or next week? Next week
we'll be doing it next Monday.
Next Monday. So you'll be able to again tune into the Spotify or YouTube, whatever you prefer, and you'll be able to keep on to those. So that really wraps up for today. So the next monthly webinar will be Wednesday, the 10th of April, 3 p.m. again. And for those that can join live, then they can put that in their diaries. So Wednesday, the 10th of April, and in advance, we'll put out the guests and the topic. And again, if anyone wants a particular topic covered or have a particular guest in mind you'd like to hear from, by all means, reach out to Todd or myself, and we can try and schedule that. So we've got some interesting ones for the next couple of months, but definitely let us know topic or person you'd like to hear from, and we'll see if we can make that happen. So with that, thanks very much to Amanda, Nick, and Jonathan. I'll give you, if you want, 10 seconds each to wrap up or say anything that you want to say, or plug. If you want to give a plug out to what you do, by all means, I'll give you a couple of seconds each. We'll go, let's see, we'll just go Amanda, Nick, and then Jonathan, then we can wrap up.
No, it's thanks for having me on. It's been good. Good to meet the other panelists, and just have a good interesting debate. And I see there's a consistent theme across the board, which kind of represents the state of planning. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, David, for the opportunity. Just want to say it's not all doom and gloom. Like, I think most conversations around planning are very negative at the moment. The media is all negative. Everybody's negative. There are still good planning officers out there. There's still some good authorities out there. And if you take the time to prepare yourself as best as you can and give the planning authority no reason to get in your road, then things can still be achieved.
It's not all bad, as Nick just said. You know, when you get problems, they create solutions, don't they? So they're the main drivers for creativity, really, to get around problems. So certainly for us, we are finding ways to combat and get around these issues. So no shameless plugs from me. I mean, we have got a couple of planning applications in which may arise, but no, it's been great to talk to everybody and learn from both of everyone's experience, Amanda's and Nick's, and hopefully we can meet again.
Fantastic. And Todd, anything I've missed or anything you want to comment on?
Nothing crazy. I think everything's been covered. Although there was a quick question from Adam, but yeah.
Well, maybe just do it separate. We'll fire an email out to the three panelists, and Adam, I promise we'll get an answer for you. Thank you for your question. So listen, with that, we're right on just under the hour. So I like to be under the hours, I keep promising. So there we are. I'll let everyone go. Have a great rest of the day, and talk to you all in due course. Take care. Stay safe. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.